Welcome to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.
Thanks for joining us on the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast today. We've got Joanna Yarrow with us. She is Chief Impact Officer at Human Nature, which is a sustainable placemaking company dedicated to designing, building and operating places that make sustainable living easy and attractive. Previously, Joanna worked as the global head of sustainable and healthy living at IKEA, where she led initiatives to make sustainable living affordable, attractive, and obviously accessible as well worldwide. She's held leadership roles in Saatchi, and she's also authored several books on sustainable living. And you've probably seen her on TV as well. But I'm going to let Joanna talk about what she's been doing, because rather than me waffle, Joanna, first of all, many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. Well, you're chairing and introducing the panels, the sessions, the Biophilic City sessions on the 17th of November, a Biophilic Design Conference. So if people haven't got the tickets, please go to the journalofbiophilic.design.com and look at the Biophilic Design tab. The conference programme is now published as well, so please have a good old look. Joanna, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Vanessa. Well, as you said, I currently help to run a company called Human Nature. We're based down in Lewes in East Sussex, and we call ourselves a campaigning development company because what we do is we, as you said, design, build, and run places, so neighbourhoods at different scales that help to make sustainable living the easy, obvious, attractive, and accessible choice. And that, for me, I suppose, has quite a natural evolution one way or another from that background that you talked about, where, as I started out, well, okay, I started out actually living in a wood. So when we're talking about biophilia, let's looking back through time, I suppose, I had a pretty guilt-plated biophilic childhood growing up in a 64-acre working wood down in Sussex. So my mum was a conservation specialist, my dad was a chartered forester, and so nature was my playground back in those days. So I grew up kind of, I suppose, and feeling connection with the natural world before I learned about it and studied it. I did then go on to study sustainability and leadership for sustainability. And for me, that kind of set me on a journey to wanting to marry those two things because most of us, even if we wanted to, aren't going to live semi-off-grid in a 64-acre Sussex working wood. So, but nonetheless, we do need to live in a way that really kind of respects and enhances that natural world that we can't live without. And so that kind of idea of how can we mainstream a better and healthier, both for us and the natural world, more sustainable way of life for as many people as possible has been kind of me, both personally and professionally. So yeah, after studying, I started out in corporate sustainability strategy consulting, set up a consultancy called Beyond Green that looked at where we live, how we live, and took that kind of knowledge and engagement into IKEA, as you say. So looking at how that business could put sustainability at the heart of its offer, and then also really focusing more and more on how it can engage with people and with our everyday life, and in looking at, the way that our physical surroundings actually have this power to inspire and enable a more sustainable way of life. So, IKEA, you might be looking at household products, or you might be looking at food. The switch from meatballs to vegetables was a surprisingly impactful one. But also, the products, the services that really lead with the human, how do we want to live and what makes life better? And then look at the natural world. So look at the materials, the products, and then how can we use that to create, if you like, the hardware and the software for a healthier and better and more sustainable way of life. So yeah, fast forwarding through working alongside that in communications and engagement, because that's also, yes, power of place, but we need to connect with people to inspire and then to enable. And then, yeah, set up human nature back in about, gosh, my 2019, 2020, around the pandemic time. So bringing all that learning back to the UK and looking at how can we really deliberately shape where we live better to give us the power to live better lives in neighbourhoods, in homes around the UK. So that's what I do today.
Lovely. Before I ask you the next question, we're going to talk about placemaking and place typologies. But I just want to ask you, just from your gut, just from your heart,
Mm.
what is it about this nature connection, this being outside, being connected to plants, trees, natural, natural materials, bio-based materials? What for you? Why is it so important? What is this special ingredient?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know what. I just know how it feels.
Yeah,
For me, even if I'm spending my time hopping between boardrooms and Zoom calls, I know I need to reset. And
yeah.
I reset by going down to the compost heap, literally, dealing with my worms, sorting out, getting some veg in from the garden,
Yeah.
taking the dog for a walk on the South Downs. My daughter, laughs at my nails. She calls them my manicure because I've got so much in them. I think, well, I mean, there's a basic biology as well as a psychology to it. It is us.
Yeah,
It's not other. And I think
yeah,
one of the challenges I think in this, we're very, very lucky in many ways. We as humans, some of us anyway, have it the best we've ever had. But we've insulated ourselves from, what enables that way of life. We don't see where stuff comes from. We don't see where it goes. We don't witness those support systems. And I think that probably doesn't do us much good. So I think actually, consciously weaving that back into our everyday, whether it's through, a natural material that, I'm sitting here at a wooden desk,
yeah,
surrounded by plants, um, whether it's through an experience, whether it's for me, I know that I feel better and I do better when nature isn't other, but I'm part of nature in my everyday life, even if I'm, mostly using my brain and computers and so on.
yeah. Absolutely. I think that's it. I think that's the real fundamental thing that, like Kellett spoke, we evolved in a bio-based environment, and now we're in a man-made, purely disconnected, manufactured environment, and that's why we're not flourishing. That's why the planet's not flourishing. We've forgotten this. It's a massive disconnect. So I want to sort of now move on to the sort of place typologies that you
Mhm.
talk about, how they work at different scales and also geographies.
Yeah,
Maybe you can explain your concept of place typologies.
of course.
Yeah, if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, well, look, heads up, I'm not a builder, an architect, a designer, or a planner. So I sit with a lot of imposter syndrome here. But, I've lived in place and I've witnessed the power of place when done worse, when done better. And when we talk about place, certainly in the work that I do and we do at Human Nature, we're not just talking about buildings. Buildings are, of course, a key part of place. Most of us do live and often work within four walls. But places aren't just the buildings.
Yeah,
Um, they are the the infrastructure around them. So
yeah,
they might be the streets, they might be the parks, they might be the alleyways, they might be the hills that I can see, and they might be the river. So place is a collection of components, some of which are buildings, and some of which is hardware. So yeah, your pavement, or your water systems, or your energy systems, and some of it's software. So it's things like the services that you need. So it might be, a co-mobility service, so that you've got a car share system or a bike share system. It might be a food production. It might be a food waste system, and so on. So a place is all those component parts. And then when we think about typologies, obviously not all places are the same. But at human nature, we want to create that kind of optimal precondition for a better, healthier, more sustainable way of life. And so the way that we're approaching that is we're looking at different types of place. So the three typologies that we're working on at the moment are, so today I'm sitting in Lewes, and this is our first project, the Phoenix, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about. And it's a neighbourhood on a brownfield site in an existing town. So we've got urban neighbourhoods as one typology. We also have a project down the road, which is rural. And that's a smaller cluster of homes on the edge of an existing village. And a huge amount of housing need in the UK actually at the moment is rural. So people, needing or wanting to live at least a semi-rural lifestyle, and that's where there's not enough homes. So we've got town neighbourhood, we've got rural, and then we have another site in the east of England, which will be much bigger. And that will be a new settlement. So that will be about 6,000 homes. So those are our three typologies. And we take all the same principles, which are around how can we design, build and run places with positive impact in mind. So positive impact for climate, for nature and for human flourishing. But how do we, and we do those through, some common ways of working, for example, bio-based materials, a real focus on active travel, reducing the need for car, thinking about people's whole lifestyles. So thinking about, the food they eat, the way they get around and the energy use rather than just the home. We have those principles and we deploy them at those three different scales because we want to make this, we're tiny, we're a small company, we're very ambitious, but, the need for pace and radical change is so huge that we want to make these projects that are very successful and wonderful in their own right, but they create precedent so that they can be copied and scaled across the UK and hopefully beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And saying, I think having something like a place typology where people can understand that and use it as a blueprint, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But
Exactly.
yeah. So just can I just ask, do you work sort of like collaboratively? I mean, how do you create this thing? And we said, you said you sort of you've got the concept, the aims, the ambitions, really to create. I mean, obviously, at the moment you're only in the UK. I mean, this is massive things that you're doing. Like you're saying you're small, but you're doing like huge things here. But I mean, ultimately, I mean, you're working with like obviously builders and stuff. Is that how it works? Is it kind of an
Yes,
amalgam?
collaboration is absolutely at the heart of it. We run something that we call deep collaboration, not our idea. I think Steve Jobs coined the phrase originally. But yes, the idea is that we pull together, we curate, if you like, best practice,
Yeah.
expertise, experience from specialists who have really deep rigor and experience in their field. I mean, a bit like, I used to say at IKEA, even IKEA, which is, bazooka's massive, can't do this on our own. We have to kind of collaborate, share and learn with the best and open source that. Very much the same principle at Human Nature. So we have a small team internally, which includes architects, designers, planners, and so on. But then we have a network of individuals and organizations who we collaborate with very closely, some of whom we've been working with one way and another for more than 30 years, and they've been doing their thing around the world. And so, for example, with the Phoenix, which is our project in Lewes, we brought together 12 different architecture practices,
Okay. Yeah.
work alongside our in-house architects and designers, all of whom have their specific way of working and experience. So some might have a different visual rendition, some might be particularly specialist in a particular type of bio-based materials. And we together look at the place itself. So even where we have typologies, they'll always be rendered differently according to the place as it exists today, to its bioregion and the kind of role it could play in the future. And then we work together very collaboratively with the community as well. So that might be our physical community, our neighbours. Lewes, where we are today, or it has 18,000 residents. But they're the specialists in the town. There are special interest groups here already. That they might be heritage groups, or they might be people who are there to support the rights of the river, or they might be people who are there to support, to advocate for the future of young people in this region. And then together so for the Phoenix, we spent 5 years going through this deep collaboration process, some of it all online during COVID, which was quite a challenge, to together create this blueprint, which, really understanding the constraints and the opportunities of the place as it is today, and the role that this new project can play in helping this radical shift towards positive outcomes. And that's, so some of that's quite technical and quite specialist, to do with drawings and master plannings and renders and the planning process and so on. Some of it is much more experiential. So, for example, here at the Phoenix, we ran a really vibrant kind of meanwhile use program, including a 3-day design festival where we had about, I forget, 3,000 or 4,000 people coming together for the 3 days to meet and work face to face with the architects, the designers that, handle the materials, look at plans and counter plans, draw, but also to actually come together to experience a different way of life. So, whether it was trying out loads of different types of bikes, for, all ages and people who've maybe never cycled before, or to try different food, or to, dance together, to sort of say, well, actually, this is what life could be like, and this is how we'd like to shape it together. So yeah, long answer, deep collaboration, absolutely at the heart of it. And then I guess that informs the nuts and bolts, right through to the planning submission. I mean, it also informs the way that these places are run, because obviously it's not just the build itself, it's the life on and around that neighborhood. Yeah, and then a more recent example is Hethel, our big project, this new settlement project in Norfolk, where earlier this year we brought together, about 15 different practices, Heatherwick Studios, Arup, right through to some, quite small niche ones, where we did an open source sprint, where we said, okay, well, we've got this government target of 1.5 million homes by the end of this administration. What if these big new towns that we're talking about, the government's talking about, what if we actually took the nature crisis and the climate crisis and the social and mental health crisis seriously? How could we design these places differently? And with that, we created a very detailed white paper called How Should We Live, which will inform the design of the project itself, but is also meanwhile being presented to the House of Lords Select Committee, to the New Towns Commission, and so on. So this idea of, yes, deep collaboration, bringing together the best of what's already learned. Most of this is not rocket science. Most of this has been done already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel or boil the ocean, but we do need to make sure that we are kind of reaching for the stars and pushing ourselves, and to both demonstrate and advocate for positive change.
Yeah, that white paper, is that possible? Could you send a link to that so that we can put this?
Absolutely.
Sounds
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
So
I say white paper, I mean, it's got more pictures than your average white paper probably, but yeah, that kind of vibe.
Yeah. It's also the names of things, isn't it? Like you said, design festival, for people to come together. It's the words we use, it's the semantics, it's all of the communications. It's obviously why, you guys are successful, because you have that background understanding that we need to be able to communicate the messaging better in a way to everybody so that we can get
Yeah.
further engagement and buy-in as well.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the climate crisis. You mentioned that,
Mm.
and obviously businesses are still slow in turning things around. Obviously, well, there's lots of companies that are doing great stuff, and the smaller companies need to be a bit more agile. That's probably just because of the layers of management and decision making and purse strings and everything else. But I really love what you're doing, and the fact that you're activating change by creating these examples. Can we just talk a little bit about the Phoenix?
Mm.
You mentioned a little bit about what it is, just so we can kind of sort of set the scene, please.
Yes, absolutely. So the Phoenix is a neighbourhood in Lewes. Lewes is a historic town in East Sussex,
Mm.
with about 18,000 residents,
Yeah.
and it sits in the centre of the South Down National Park. So it's quite unusual as a place. It's got lots of historic precedent, and it's also the largest town in a national park in the UK, which makes blessing. And the Phoenix site itself is 7.9 hectares of it's brownfield site.
Mm.
So it's been light industry for centuries. It's on the River Ouse, which is tidal. So it's been an inland port, and it's been home to ironworks, the Phoenix Ironworks. Actually, that's not a brand name. It's just it works quite well, but that it's been the Phoenix Ironworks for years, and it's been semi-derelict for several decades, and several organizations bought the site and sort of teamed up with volume house builders and put proposals together for kind of business as usual development, which wasn't going to be viable, and B, the local community was very upset about because they recognize a huge, Southeast England, there's a huge housing demand and we need jobs, we need economic stimulus and so on, but building more of the problem as usual in terms of kind of cutter development wasn't going to work. So they actually, very organized town, um, organized and created an organization called Phoenix Rising, where they wanted to be not oppositional but propositional, and that's actually how we got involved. My husband and I, known as environmentalists, moved back to Lewes, which is my hometown, um, about 9 years ago. And so they asked us to help them to come up with some propositional ideas for how this site might be used differently to meet all those needs. And on the back of that, they actually invited us to become the developer. And that was the birth of Human Nature, from advisors to, kind of putting our money where our mouth is. And so, yeah, long story short, as I said, 5 years of what we bought the land, we competed against Berkeley Homes. And then 5 years of really, really deep work
Mm.
to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, how can this kind of precious site fulfill all these roles in this town? And then, yeah, finally got planning permission after an awful long process
Yeah.
for 685 homes.
Mm.
So mixed tenure, the idea of creating a place to start and a place to stay, from 205 affordable homes through to later living, very, very kind of vibrant mixed community. Totally led by that impact brief of climate, nature, and human flourishing. We have what we call a circle of impact that steers that. So how could we, for example, build almost entirely with bio-based materials? So it will be the UK's largest bio-based build. So using timber, using other biomaterials, hempcrete, that sort of thing. But also to look at how we can create a really low carbon, looking at total place and low total lifestyle from a climate perspective. So not just the materials of the building and the performance of the building, but also, for example, mobility. So that's a huge part of, your and my carbon footprint. That'll be more than a quarter. How can we design this place so you don't need a car? You've got, access to shared mobility. You can walk and cycle, and and when we think about nature, not just the materials that we use, but also the kind of nature services performed by the neighbourhood. So thinking about water and the role of the river, the role of the water coming off the South Downs, designing that into Lewes floods. So you've got to
Yeah.
design all that in, designing for productive nature, so that we're actually, creating, I hate the name biodiversity net gain, but, really scaling up on nature productivity in the site through planting, through gardens, through nature corridors, through to food. Again, big part of, probably a third of your my carbon footprint is going to be from food. So how can we design the site so that it can actually produce food even in this tight urban context, and work with the local food suppliers and so on, so that we can really start being an active catalyst within the bioregion, for materials, for food, and for ecosystem services. So yeah, we've got 685 homes, but it's mixed use. So we've also got about 20,000 square meters of workspace designed in. We've got a riverside park. We've got those food growing systems, the green walkable streets, timber construction, circular systems, and then also social inclusion, accessibility, designing in human interaction into part of your everyday experience. So it's sort of petri dish, for sustainable living in an urban context in the UK. But as I said, there's no flying cars. It's not radical innovation in that respect. There are whole homes, streets, neighborhoods around the world living very wonderfully in this way. It's like a jigsaw. We're bringing together the best of that in a UK context.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, I think. And I think as a user, I mean, I hate the word blueprint actually, but I seem to be using that a hell of a lot lately. But it's just a brilliant example and successful example. And the steps you've just shared, saying, getting the community engagement, talking to people. But I think as well, I think the main difference here is that the main driver is to do the right thing. Is to do the right thing. Is to do the right thing for people. Is to do the right thing for planet and nature. You're coming at it from a completely different perspective. For us, for me, it's the biophilic kind of concept. It's the biophilic hypothesis. It's the fact that we're respecting life, us, our place in it, and the life that surrounds us and nurtures us, and we're dependent on. So, I mean, I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful example, and thank you for creating it, actually, and thank you and your husband for believing in what you're doing and doing it, and pulling everyone along. I want to ask a little bit about actually this, so how the biophilic design concepts and the principles overlap here. I mean, you've already mentioned bio-based materials. You've mentioned obviously all the sort of the community side of things as well. Plus obviously having food local and things. I mean, maybe can you just give us like just a couple of examples, please, where you see it directly overlapping?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, as you say, it's creating that concept, that physical context, and then that also the way of management that kind of supports and enhances that nature-based way of life without it being other.
Yes.
So it's kind of built into the physical structure,
Yeah.
and it's built into the kind of the way that people's everyday life is designed. So yeah, we have it in the materials, as I was saying, in terms of the wood, and the other biomaterials that the buildings and the physical infrastructure are made from. But then also other forms of infrastructure, so the sort of greenways and green corridors, not just across the site or, providing one back corridor, but actually in and around, every building, every pocket park, every courtyard has been designed with that in mind. Edible landscapes, so edible for humans, but also edible for, all the other creatures in our landscapes that need feeding, designing in, deliberately for pollination and pollination corridors, and designing in for water, as I was saying. So on the bigger projects, it might be wetlands. In the smaller projects or smaller sites like the Phoenix, we have most of the homes are apartments, and they're built around courtyards in a sort of Scandinavian way. And so that courtyard becomes a real focal point for life of all forms, not just human. And one aspect of life is aquatic life.
Yeah.
And so they're designed as part of each courtyard as a rain garden,
Nice.
which where you have, the water runoff from
Yeah.
the downs, when it's very rainy, it needs somewhere to sit before it goes into the river. So
Mm,
that will be a holding tank, but it will also be supporting all sorts of aquatic life,
amazing.
including, children's play space and so on. So yeah, the living materials be wood, be lime, be hempcrete. Um, and then the kind of the multi-sensory
Mm,
experience,
yeah.
again, for us and for other living creatures, is really deliberately designed in. So here in the South Downs, we're conscious of dark skies,
Yeah.
rightly, designing that in for quality of life for all of us. The scent, the touch, are the sort of create places that kind of both soothe and stimulate us and
Yeah.
other creatures. And then, yeah, designing in that kind of everyday connection, not necessarily as an other activity, but that we will have the opportunity for nature connection, designed in probably subconsciously
Mm,
into multiple touch points in your everyday life. So yeah, it could be your roof garden on
mm,
the blocks that you share. It could be your own balcony, but it will certainly be those courtyards. It will be, when we design streets for people rather than cars, because we don't have on-site car parking, we have a co-mobility centre where if you need your car, that's where it is. You create space for other forms of life. So you create space for human interaction, but you also create space for also all forms of kind of bio life. So um, you get that physical nature connection before you walk outside your front door, and then every moment until you get to the train, you get to the office.
mm,
Um, you designing in nature-based play,
mm.
not just in playgrounds, but again into that and play for all, not just
Yeah.
for children.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that idea is that, yeah, we're not othering nature, and we're not including nature as another stakeholder, if you like, but we're centering it. We're putting it very central, um, to everyday life. And
Yeah.
it's not something that you have to choose instead of something else.
Mm. I love it. It's a beautiful symbiotic creation of life, of
Mm.
life.
Yeah.
I think it's wonderful, and I really, and I do think that the main difference here, what you're doing, is there's the will to do this. There's the
Mm.
will to do the right thing.
Mm.
I think there's lots. I think there's probably, I would say there's 90% of people want to do this. There's just 10% of people that maybe either A, don't understand it, or B, are more driven by immediate gains, profit, turnover, whatever it might be, which prevent this from happening more generally.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think this is a thing, or is it
Well, I mean, I think we,
it's
we've kind of
complicated?
we kind of boxed ourselves into a corner a bit, haven't we, as a
Mm,
species and as a society,
mm,
by having the starting point is that we are separate from nature.
yeah.
Um, you know, our company name, Human Nature, is there for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
But I think that, we're witnessing this at the moment. Well, firstly, witnessing this as a relatively recent developer, if you
Mm,
like. I've always, as I was saying, I have a very kind of biophilic upbringing. I've always worked in
yeah.
sustainability one way or another. It's quite stark how in the last 5 years, when I've had sort of developer as part of my job title in one way or another,
Mm,
people just don't trust you.
no.
They assume that you are lying, that you are extractive, that you
Yeah.
are, basically part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And I get it. It's not, it's really unpleasant, but I do get it.
Yeah.
It's because, we have, it's certainly in development and placemaking, we've not been good at acknowledging the power of place in shaping how we live
Mm,
and in creating and designing places that enable people to live really well.
yeah.
We have been designing shit lives for people and
Yeah.
for nature for
Yeah.
a long time now.
Yeah.
And we've got ourselves into the point. to this mindset where we're like, it's human or nature.
I know.
It's bad. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers because of course you can have nature without, you can have the rest of nature without humans quite happily. I'm sure you can't have humans without the rest of nature. And so when we think forward, this idea of, again, profit or nature,
Mm.
actually, as developers, the the appetite and the desire for what we're talking about is so big. I mean, we've not done, we've done no sales, no marketing. We're not at that point yet. But I've got on my computer nearly 1,000 people who have written to say, we want to live at the Phoenix. When's it ready? How do we, we've
Yeah.
only got 685 homes when it's full. The idea that, people want to live better lives and people want even if they don't actively want hands or nature in their everyday life, although once you witness it, I think it's hard to say no to.
Mm.
But they don't, no, I don't, very few people want to trash the world we rely on, but they see it
Mm.
as a playoff, where it isn't, and it's like, designing and building places that help people to live this way and also enhance the systems that we rely on is, it's better for all of us. And it will, I mean, I genuinely believe, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this because it's not easy, that it's also very commercially viable.
Yeah.
Um, but but then you have to be in the business of delivering, lives.
Mm.
You have to be in the business of delivering outcomes, not just units.
Yeah.
Land flipping. We're surrounded by greenfield sites around here, and building on a greenfield site might be necessary,
Mm.
but building, X thousand, let's call them wimpy box type B, that locks people
Yeah.
into unhealthy, car-dependent, unsustainable living and trashes the landscape, and the developer moves on and extracts their profit.
Yeah.
Yes, that doesn't work. So sorry, you got me on a rant. I can't remember what the original question was.
Absolutely, though you're right. I mean, you compare it to how these nutty type houses that we see being literally. It feels like they're being thrown up without care. That they
Yeah.
are cookie cutter. They're there. They're tiny rooms. They're tiny windows. Tiny this, tiny that, tiny that. No green. Like I say, they strip obviously the land. And I know they move the newts and all this kind of thing that they say, and they box tick in that way. But how amazing would it be to use the land to inform the buildings, to talk to the people as well who are going to be living there and the communities that you're going to be affecting, to be able to create something that's actually going to enhance all life.
Yes.
I wanted to talk. We're going to talk. Actually, maybe we'll talk now actually about the fact that you call yourself a campaigning developer, which I actually love, and I think I think I think you should be on telly definitely again. We need to have you get your own TV show to talk about this again. But I really do think there should be more of you. I think you're sort of at you people who are listening to this podcast who are thinking about maybe changing roles or influencing something or what can I do? What can I do? I think this would be amazing if this was, a campaigning developer would be mentioned by schools, in the careers offices if they still have those. Um, I mean, when we've touched on this, and obviously you mentioned the other companies that are throwing up these buildings, but what advice would you give, or what can developers do differently in the years to come when we've got population, food, climate and health crises, all these things that you've mentioned? What advice would you give them? What can they do and what should they be doing?
Well, firstly, I don't think it's just the developer
Mm.
who needs to reframe this. I
Okay.
think it's all of us.
Yeah.
I think we have a whole society problem right now
Mm.
where we've kind of lost sight of the power of place,
Yeah.
and neighborhoods and the physical world around us,
Mm.
in helping to address some of the problems that we face now and also making them worse. So, we've got such a big job on our hands
Mm.
now and in the years to come to
Mm.
make, healthy, sustainable, low impact living mainstream for all. Can't be niche. In order to do that, we need to both inspire. So we need to help people to, well, firstly, see this problem. I don't think many people, oh, there are some people who still don't think there isn't a problem, but we need to kind of both see that there's a problem and that change is possible.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
we need to enable, because you can't just rouse people up without giving them any means for actions. You've got to inspire and enable a healthier, positive, lower impact, more sustainable way of life. Yeah. And we need to recognize that at the moment, places, neighbourhoods, particularly in the UK, do the opposite.
Mm.
They depress and disable us from living that healthy, more sustainable. So, whether we as individuals or businesses or councils or even the government, really want to make this change happen, if we continue to ignore this superpower of places,
Yeah.
we're making it so hard for ourselves. We're building more of the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a job for all of us somehow, is to kind of wake up and say, actually, we need the whole ecosystem's got to change, but the power of place is pretty unique. The way we design, build, and run places can help really make that shift from, shit to better lives fast. We can retrofit, but particularly in new places. Yeah. So that and we don't, in Scandinavia, so I was lucky to live and work in Sweden for a while. Not perfect, but this is so baked in to the collective worldview there. And it's literally taught. My daughter was taught this stuff at school.
Yeah.
Firstly, she was out in nature the whole time, but she was taught about connection. She was taught about, how the way the home helps you to do these different things. It was in the planning system. It was in the town planning system. It was in the education system. It was in the tax system. It's like, so you've got all of that, and helps, it's that it creates the conditions for success. Within that context, the developer is then better empowered to make positive change. So we need, let's not, the developers can't do it on their own. At the moment, it's much, much easier, quicker, and more profitable to build shit if you're a developer. It really is. I
Yeah.
mean, we could have got
Yeah.
planning permission so much faster, and cost ourselves so much less money if we had just, said, yeah, not a problem. We'll spit you out, 500 business as usual,
Yeah.
and off we go to the Cayman Islands. So we've got, it's that whole system approach. But then I think that, when we also start to, so then if we say, okay, well, we recognize the power of place and we're going to support that, fiscally and politically and socially and culturally. And then if I'm a developer, it's like, well, that's my brief. My brief is to explore how should we live, and if we're making a new place, how can that, what superpowers does it have, and then that we're stewards rather than extractors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're, a place isn't just built, a place is lived, hopefully for a very long time. And so the developer, we're there in that early stage. Some might move on, part of our model is we stay on,
Yeah.
but it's that convener. So it's building those partnerships with the local communities and the communities of interest. And it's that embedding of those positive impacts and those regenerative impacts into every decision.
Mm.
And then it's being transparent about that. It's open source learning, it's sharing. And then, I mean, being a developer right now, if you're a young person, I mean, how attractive is that? Because I don't know. I mean, clearly there's a lot of people doing it, but, because as my experience in the last 5 years, you're seen as the devil.
Yeah.
Good reason. So, it's a ridiculously powerful position to be in, because you are shaping people's lives for decades or generations to come. What a responsibility. That should be held so carefully by the developer, but also by the community, also by all the people who have the power to give them agency and shape that direction. So yeah, it's kind of on all of us to see development differently and to steer and enable that. But we've got to do it really fast.
Mm. It's really inspiring, really
Mm.
inspiring. I really hope people listening are just wanting to retrain, go and become, go and
Yes, come
become a
on.
developer
Yeah.
for good.
And also,
Yeah.
as I was saying earlier, again, this stuff, most of it's not rocket science. It's
Mm-mm.
extraordinary how pig-headed we are about learning from what's already happening.
I know.
It's like
Yeah.
when I'm talking with planning officers and so on, I'm like, not being funny, but can we just go on a train to Copenhagen and spend a couple of days there? Because, this is not new.
Mm.
We can't obviously just copy and paste all the time,
Yeah.
but the evidence is there.
Mm.
We don't need to go back to the drawing board. We need to get over ourselves on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really egalitarian what you're doing as well, because you're creating these typologies for people to learn, to come and experience, to look, to follow what you're doing as well. You mentioned that white
Yeah.
paper as well that I'm going to put a link in the spiel that goes with the podcast. Yeah, I really it can be done. You are doing it. You're proving it can be
Yes.
done.
And I think
Um,
that power, the power of lived experience, I think
yeah.
is more is stronger than almost anything. And I've seen
Mm,
this time and time again. I've seen it in my own kind of
mm,
upbringing, seen
yeah.
it at IKEA,
Yeah.
working with designers and working with household families
Yeah.
and so on. It's that, actually when we all get a chance
Mm,
to experience things done differently,
yeah.
whether I'm a householder,
Yeah.
whether I'm a CEO, whether I'm a politician or a policy, a planning
Yeah.
policy maker, I think that that really helps unlock
Mm,
this fear of change.
yeah.
And I think that that's also something that we need to collectively move into, impact dashboards and so on. Of course, we need them. Um, but, and let's not forget that this stuff is all around us.
Yeah.
And, with all the culture wars and all that awfulness going on at the moment, it's
Mm,
fear of
yeah.
change and
Mm,
other. And so giving ourselves the opportunity to learn with and from each other and with and from space, places is key, really is.
mm. Absolutely. Well, it takes a pioneer to put this out first and pull it all together, like you say, stuff that's been there, but you're looking at it in a completely yeah, I'm going to use the word again, egalitarian, biophilic way. So yeah, well done and thank you actually. So
Oh, thanks.
um, well, we're getting near the end, and there's so many other questions I could ask you. I could just keep going and going and going and going and going. But before I ask you the final question, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Uh, I just sound a bit like a right old hippie, really, which I am one. But I think that
I'm with you on
some
that one. High five.
a lot of this agenda, is very meta.
Mm,
It's about policy,
yeah,
and institutional change, or it's about new build, which might not be something that you're going to experience on your doorstep, or might not be for you. And I think that the power sits with all of us, nonetheless,
yeah,
to kind of weave this into our everyday, both observing, just taking a look at your morning,
mm,
before you got to your desk,
yeah,
and how did place influence you physically, psychologically, health-wise, financially? And how might you be able to shape that better to both, be healthier for yourself and the natural world, and your family? That might be something really simple, like, spending 5 minutes walking a different route to work or to school with your children. It might be, and then, are there something that you could do on a week by week basis that's different? Maybe, on your street or with your neighbor or in your local school. Um, and kind of really going from that kind of nuts and bolts of your everyday life. Again, not other stuff you're going to be doing anyway. It's
yeah,
tweaks, and witnessing the benefit and sharing the benefit with those around you, and kind of building outwards from there, as well as building the meta structure. And that's the only way I can deal with the world that we live in today. And I think that, and I think so that opportunities for those everyday tweaks and connections for ourselves and those around us both empower us, and revitalize us to make change happen. We start demonstrating witnessing and experiencing the solutions and demonstrating it. And when you've got that little everyday experience, you're an expert, then it's easier to talk to your workplace or to your council, or to your head teacher, or to your MP and say, you know what, I know something about this because I've done it and I've witnessed, and I'd like a little bit more of this, please, or a little bit less than that, please. That's your mandate. We can all do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joanna. Thank you. Really looking forward to seeing you at the Biophilic Design Conference on the 17th of November.
Being there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be a great day. And yeah, I just look forward to continuing this conversation as well next year. We can help accelerate and augment what you're doing. Actually, I think it's wonderful. And we've got, a wonderful community listening to this and who read the journal and who are part of the conference and everything else, who want to do the right thing. And how we can support them to action things locally would be really good. So
yeah.
Lovely. Well, so the final question then that I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, if you could paint the world with a magic brush of biophilia, what would it look like?
Wow, gosh. I think that, well, let's start with a neighborhood, because that's my play space at the moment. So if we think of a neighborhood, I think it would be that nature wasn't the escape from that kind of urban way of life, but it was that urban way of life itself. Wouldn't it be wonderful if my daughter's school had a forest instead of fences? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our walk to work included some fruit trees, some flowers and some bird song? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our homes and offices breathed without us needing to open the window? Wouldn't it be wonderful if our children and our colleagues knew about and prioritized, the plants and creatures around them? And where we're not disconnected from or needing to make a choice about everyday life or nature, but that it's baked into our everyday interaction, and our lives are just that much better for it, whether we witness and acknowledge that experience or not. It's all adding up.
Thank you for listening to the Journal of Biophilic Design podcast.